Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Climate of Sport podcast with me, Claire Poole. Fab to be back with you again this week and covering some of the stories and things I think will be of interest to you in our climate hat trick. So let's dig in to it. Okay, the first story this week I'm going to talk to you about is shirt sponsor shift. Yes, that's right. We love alliteration here. So on the 15th of August, the new season is going to start. For the Premier League, the 2026-27 season is the first one that gambling sponsors are going to be banned from the front of football shirts. That's the first time the ban is going to come into effect after in 2023, Premier League clubs voted to voluntarily ban gambling and betting companies from featuring just on the front of shirts. As a reminder, they can appear on sleeves and in hoardings around stadiums and other places. So they are legally allowed to sponsor other commercial inventory, but they are not going to appear on the front of shirts from now on. So I had a look into what's actually changed and what this might mean, and maybe some lessons we can draw or insights we can think about. So in the 2025-26 season, 11 teams out of the 20 Premier Leagues had gambling sponsors on the front of their shirts. So a small but significant majority. What has shifted now that the ban's come into place? Okay, first of all, 3 of the teams out of the 11 with front of shirt gambling sponsors have been relegated. So Burnley, West Ham and Wolverhampton Wanderers are no longer in the Premier League. So that leaves us with 8 who are still in England's top flight football league and have had to replace their sponsors. We're still waiting to hear about a couple of them. Nottingham Forest, formerly sponsored by Bally's, a casino company, has not yet announced a front of shirt sponsor, and neither has Sunderland, previously sponsored by W88. There are rumours of Visit Ghana being the new front of shirt, so let's see on that. Nothing confirmed just yet, which leaves us with 6. Okay, AFC Bournemouth formerly had a gambling sponsor, now replaced by Vitality, which is a health and life insurance company. They also own the stadium rights, so it's kind of an existing sponsor that now, obviously, they've expanded that package into front of shirt. Brentford, again, formerly had a gambling sponsor. Now they have got Indeed, which is a global employment jobs recruitment organization, to take their front of shirt sponsor. So that's interesting in terms of a direct consumer public-facing website where people go to either post their jobs or find jobs. So that's interesting. Fulham's new sponsor is an organisation called ClickHouse, not one I've heard of before. I wonder if you have. Bear with me, I'm reading this because it is a lot of words. ClickHouse is an open source, column-oriented DBMS for online analytical processing that allows users to generate analytical reports using structured query language queries in real time. That's taken from their website. Essentially, it's a global technology company that looks at real-time analytics, data infrastructure, and AI applications. So we'll come back to that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Aston Villa have taken on Visit Rwanda as their front of shirt sponsors. So some of you will recognise that, as they previously served as Arsenal's sleeve sponsor for 7 years. The deal with the Gunners ended this summer that's just gone, summer 2026. Some have flagged this as a controversial choice for Villa due to concerns about Rwanda's human rights record. It has been the subject of a number of protests from Gunners for Peace campaign group after the UN linked Rwanda to supporting the M23 rebel group who captured part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. DRC's Foreign Minister Teresa Kayibanda Wagner even wrote to Arsenal during the club. She wrote to Arsenal previously to urge the club to terminate this, quote, bloodstained sponsorship deal with this particular tourism body. They also have partnerships with Paris Saint-Germain, Atletico Madrid, Los Angeles Clippers, and the Los Angeles Rams as well. So although a move away from gambling, this is not a straightforward choice for Villa in terms of that background. Crystal Palace have moved from a gambling sponsor to an organisation called Temporal, which is an open source software platform powering some of the world's most advanced AI and enterprise technology systems. Apparently, they help companies build applications that remain reliable and operational at enormous scale. They are apparently trusted by organizations like OpenAI, Netflix, JP Morgan Chase, and Vodafone. Essentially, they enable developers to build software that can withstand outages, failures, disruption across critical systems. Okay, also a bit of a mouthful. We're going to come back to them. And Everton They have moved to CMC Markets. That's a British FTSE 250 company that have a global multi-asset financial services firm. Essentially, they enable people to trade or invest portfolios online. So we're going to go into a few of these in more detail and tell you why I'm talking about it as well. Broadly, let's think of what buckets they fall into. So gambling sponsors are gone, and now they've been replaced with insurance, employment, tourism, financial services, software technology, and AI. So there was, after the announcement in 2023, there was a lot of discussion in our corner of the internet about the concern that this ban might move the problem sideways. Betting and gambling, obviously, a move away from the unsocial and dangerous risks that causes for fans who lead to gambling addictions, etc., and the social cost of having gambling as a big focal point within football and sport. There was concerns that it was going to move sideways and create more real estate for heavy carbon sponsors, like we've seen everywhere else, oil and gas, aviation, car manufacturers, etc. So we haven't seen that happen. That's the first thing. That hasn't come to pass. What it has highlighted is a move to tech. Basically, a lot of these solutions are online. So let's go into them in a little bit more depth and think about them. So Fulham sponsor ClickHouse. I mean, reading this website, I think I'm a reasonably technologically able person, but their tagline is powers agentic systems with millisecond queries at petabyte scale. I think they do things fast and big. That's what we're taking from that. And the alignment shared for this deal is to support communities in learning about the future of technology, create opportunities to develop competencies across data and AI. It's an open source database, apparently built for speed. So when you search something, you get an answer instantly. This is very interesting. It's a global organization. As AI becomes more prevalent, they say ClickHouse has emerged as the database of choice because AI needs real-time context to give accurate results. So a nod towards the rise of AI and how it's coming through in sports sponsorship. Crystal Palace has sponsored Temporal, another AI-connected organization. It provides an orchestration layer that saves applications automatically, handles timeouts, dropouts, etc., and allows tasks to be picked up where they left off. So both of them on their websites have pricing that's probably accessible for you and I, but how many potential customers actually need these services, or how many people are chomping at the bit to get this sort of service, I'm not sure. But they are technically a direct consumer solution. You can go on their website, you can do a free trial, you can access quite transparent pricing to access it. So Everton CMC Markets allows people to trade or invest. They've got their Everton crest very proudly now on their homepage and some video running behind it. They also sponsor the Australian Football League club St Kilda. They sponsor the New Zealand rugby club the Blues and the King's School Canterbury Boat Club in the UK. They're already in sports sponsorship. Everton, I would say, is their largest partnership so far. But shirt sponsorship in football or in any sport is critical in terms of what people are actually viewing. So we know a lot of people won't necessarily go and view sporting games in person. That's only a small percentage of fans or viewers or spectators globally. So that visibility on kit is a really, really important part of the commercial asset basket. So it's interesting as we interpret shirt sponsors and where they reflect economic values. So I had a look back and looked for more information. In the 90s, we had a lot of consumer goods products. We had breweries, we had electronics. You'll remember very famously Manchester United having Sharp, for example, some electronic goods that are perhaps not as visible now, but we remember those from the 90s. Then in the noughties, we had more telecoms companies, airlines, and finances starting to come forward a little bit more. I feel like the 2010s for sure were dominated by betting companies. I think we can say that, especially in terms of the breadth and the visibility. And now in the 2020s, obviously betting companies merging into things like AI, enterprise, software, technology, fintech, cybersecurity, etc. The reason this is interesting for us is that some of these organizations, like the ones I mentioned, have got some similarities and overlap in terms of what we talk about with heavy carbon sponsorship, especially around oil and gas sponsorship in sport. So these sorts of companies don't necessarily need football fans to decide. So if we look at oil and gas, when they sponsor sport, we know that those companies aren't looking for football fans to decide to buy their product, whether it be petrol or oil or gas. Fuel demand is driven by a lot more that they can't control, like geography, price and the infrastructure available to people as well. So it's not a direct consumer product, but that sponsorship helps with what academics call a social license to operate. So the informal public acceptance that makes it easier for companies to do things like attract talent, negotiate with governments, reassure investors, and avoid becoming politically isolated. So now we're seeing again some of these new sponsors that I've mentioned, although technically they are direct to consumer in some ways, or in a lot of ways, they probably aren't doing this to attract a customer base. They aren't probably expecting millions of customers to be attracted to their organizations in a way that perhaps other sponsors that we've seen in the past or we are currently seeing now have. So other sponsors that maybe are looking more at those straightforward on. Newcastle's got a new sponsor for this season now, Knox Hydrate. They're a sports drink company. They are probably hoping that the majority of Newcastle fans are aware of their product and start buying their product because they sell sports drinks, a small price item that they want to sell at scale. Others, it's about visibility. So Arsenal with Emirates, Brighton with Amex, Liverpool with Standard Chartered, Man City with Etihad, Spurs with AIA. There is an element of direct to consumer, but it's about probably more widely visibility. And I think that's what we're seeing here with this shift as well. The broader lesson here, I think, that we want to take away is that the most expensive sports sponsorships are often purchased by companies that actually probably don't need that mass market consumer. They need larger levels of legitimacy, visibility, brand reputation, etc. And that's why I think this change of shirt sponsorship is interesting to us as we think about heavy carbon and oil and gas sponsorship, because we're seeing a shift in the market and it is following a similar playbook to other areas that we are looking at as well. So something to think about there, hopefully interesting and useful to reflect on. And again, an idea of investment in reputation capital in sports sponsorship rather than direct to consumer products. And I think there's broadly a lot of lessons to be learned from that and a lot of insights to be gained. All right, the second story this week at the Climate Hat-Trick is the ripples of youth sport. So we talk pretty constantly here on the podcast and in our newsletter and in our media and social media about the impacts of extreme heat on sport. And we're going to look at that for this story again today, but most frequently we talk about the impacts on professional sports. In the last week we covered as well the fact that professional baseball games in South Korea were cancelled because of extreme heat, and we've also covered the Tour de France frequently around the impacts of extreme heat of retirements by cyclists. It was covered a lot during the FIFA Men's World Cup. We talk a lot about the impact on professional sport. This is because those news stories are picked up by mainstream media, they attract headlines and they demand coverage. But what we've seen a lot of in the past week in terms of coverage is those stories about kids and youth sport. So one of the stories I picked up this week was high school football players, American football, enduring triple-digit temperatures on their first day of practice in Encino, Southern California, which was reported by the LA Times. So Eric Sondheimer, who wrote the article, shows Cresby's Brian Bilek, who's the athletic director, doing a wet bulb globe temperature check to see what modifications were needed for practice, something I've honestly not seen before. I don't know if you have. We know it happens. We know these temperatures are taken, but this is tweet or whatever they're called now on X, an X thing that shows the athletic director doing this. So we'll put a link in the show notes to have a look at that in case you haven't seen that yourself. It's interesting to see. So that, in terms of the triple digits in Fahrenheit, so mid to high 30s in Celsius, that young people are expected to train in now, and the process of an athletic director as part of their pre-training work now doing a wet bulb globe temperature, I think is a marked shift in youth sports that we should be aware of. Forbes had a piece out about how extreme heat is rewriting the rules of youth sport and highlighted the vulnerability of young people because their bodies regulate temperature differently to adults. So we talk about this a lot. When you are a able-bodied adult human, your body and your physiology can regulate temperature in a way that young people, older people, or people perhaps who are in wheelchairs or have additional needs, their bodies work differently, and therefore they are the people we need to make sure are okay during periods of extreme heat. So the young people, this is this unique challenge and vulnerability of young people. So in that article, a senior fellow at Aspen Institute, Lauren Shifter, spoke about how sports organizations from professional baseball to Formula One are already adapting to heat. But for our children, she said, fragmented youth sports and camp systems and an unrelenting culture to just push through leave them vulnerable. And the article highlighted that heat exposes a unique health challenge because it is both invisible and familiar, leading people to underestimate danger and possibly delay action, even though extreme heat is one of the deadliest weather hazards to our health. So the article also flagged this Play It Cool, a new national campaign in the United States launched to help reduce heat illness in youth sport by encouraging children, parents, coaches, athletic organizations to recognize those warning signs before an early warning sign turns into a medical emergency. The campaign is led by Dr. Seuss's The Thorax alongside athletes Robin Arzon and Nafisa Collier as well, who also is an ambassador for Eco Athletes and Protect Where We Play and others, very visible in this work. Then lastly, friend of Sport Positive and speaker at our upcoming summit, Dr. Jessica Murphy, was also interviewed, and that was available this week, about how kids in low-income areas especially can be more affected. So in low-income areas, teams may lack access to things like air-conditioned buildings, and they might find it much more difficult to continue to play outside during these extremely hot days. But importantly, whilst finding it challenging outside, perhaps don't have access to air-conditioned buildings to go inside and play, and therefore are left more vulnerable to the impacts and being more affected by extreme heat as well. So what are we saying? We're saying we need to rapidly adapt to changing temperatures to keep kids safe, but we also urgently need to mitigate so that these challenges don't get ever larger and into a pace where adaptation is then impossible because it's gone too far. We know academic research tells us that participation in youth sport leads to better life outcomes. We know that. So research has shown in areas like academia, in terms of how well kids do academically, for their physical health, for their mental well-being, for self-esteem and happiness. It can help keep kids safe as well. Partaking in youth sport can help them go to a space that is safe, away from perhaps unsafe social environments like gangs or other things they can get into on the streets, or perhaps a home life setting that is volatile as well, and not forgetting that they are the pipeline to our future professional stars. So the ability for youth sport to happen safely in a warming world, this doesn't just relate to sport. It will have ripples across our entire society if youth sport don't take care of young people and continue to adapt to ensure that they can continue to play and get the benefits of that, and then also mitigate and play a role in community awareness to make sure that we are taking action to reduce how bad this is. And every degree matters, as we know, in terms of reducing the climate crisis and taking action around mitigation as well. So when you think about what you're seeing on screen, when you're watching sport or you're in a sports stadium and they have necessary hydration breaks, or you see Olympians with ice towels around their neck, just think about what kids are having to contend with in youth sport. Okay, our last story is about the Commonwealth Games. India has now been passed the baton, and happily, they are keeping that baton green. So the Slim Down 2026 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow wrapped up. Sustainability was at the heart of the Games model. It was all about making the most of what already existed, then building new because of the short cycle, and then taking over from Victoria in terms of hosting the Commonwealth Games for 2026. Every one of the Games venues sat within a small 8-mile radius. 100% of the competition venues ran on renewable energy from the Scottish grid. They received the international ISO 2012-1 Sustainable Event Management certification. This was embedded across planning and delivery from day one. So we know in a lot of aspects, the 2026 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow was very sustainable. And we covered previously the fact that their CEO has said it can provide the model for the next 100 years of how to run games like this in a more sustainable, both financially and environmentally way. There was some legacy as well. The Commonwealth Sport joined forces with Sustainable Markets Initiative, which is one of the partners of the Sport Positive Summit this year, and the Royal Commonwealth Society to help shape a more sustainable future for sporting events across the Commonwealth. As this partnership was announced during the Games, leaders from sport, business, government and sustainability came together to explore how major events can deliver long-term benefits for communities whilst also reducing environmental impact. The baton has now been passed to Ahmedabad, if I can say it, the city that will host the 2030 Games, and they are going to lead on the sustainability front as well. So there's already been announcements of leveraging Gujarat's green energy to ensure 100% electric local transportation. Sidebar, it's 90% already, so they're doing really well. There has been confirmation that all the venues needed already exist, although there will be some refurbishment, they say around 20%. The construction emissions are going to be tiny compared to building new venues. And they also want to host the most para-friendly games, with hotels being accessible, and also they want hostels built for the game to later become facilities for students. This is part of India's move to become a sport powerhouse. So we've seen a couple of other stories recently that lead us to the same conclusion of India's focus on being both a sport powerhouse globally and also leading on sustainability. So just this week, a record amount of money, 36,441 Indian crore, which is about 3.8 billion American dollars, has been announced for the Khelo India scheme running from 2026 to 2031, and is targeted athlete programs and upcoming major hosting ambitions, including the 2030 Commonwealth Games and also a bid for the 2036 Olympics and Paralympics as well. So they are investing in sport, and also we're seeing announcements around sustainability in sport too. So Green Hockey Oceania and Green Hockey Switzerland signed a memorandum of understanding to establish a green ecosystem for ice sports in India. So again, some green news there. They are our climate hat-trick stories for this week. So the first story was shirt sponsor shifts. The second story was around the ripples of youth sport. And the third story was India's been passed the baton and they are keeping it green. I hope these stories have been interesting to you this week around the world of sport and how it intersects with sustainability and the wider landscape of sport business as well. We'll be back next week with more stories for you to learn from, engage with, and as always, get in touch and tell us what you think. If you've got stories or angles you'd like us to cover, if your sport is doing something brilliant and you haven't heard it mentioned, get in touch. We love to feature and delve into some of the angles of stories that are coming out every week. So that's it from us. Have a wonderful week. Take care of yourselves and look forward to seeing you again soon.